All right, thank you for joining us today for our webinar on managing profiles and permission sets. Today we're going to take a deep dive into talking about profiles and permission sets, some of the troubles around them, and some solutions that can really help you, and best practices that can really help you manage them. As we get started here, just a couple quick things. The presenters, we have Bill Appleton. He's the CTO of Metazoa, and he's the one who's going to be taking us on that deep dive for profiles and permission sets. He's someone who's been working on this for a long time, and hopefully everyone will benefit from his expertise. And I'm Tom Appleton. I'm going to give a quick, less than 5-minute overview of our Snapshot tool, and then we're going to dive into that deep dive on those profiles and those permission sets. So just really quickly, what is Snapshot? Metazoa makes a product called Snapshot. That's our org management solution for Salesforce admins. It does a lot, but if you broke it into some general categories, one would be clicks not code release management. You don't have to be a developer who understands XML or works with repos to use our release management tool. We work with repos, and you can dive down to that XML level, but it's not required. This is really a tool that gives the full power of a release management solution, but it's really usable by admins and release managers as well. We do relational data migration, so we can move data between orgs, but we maintain all those relationships, and we have a lot of nice features there as well, like scrambling fields, mapping fields. We have comprehensive org documentation. So this is things like a data dictionary to document your objects and fields, their properties, where they're related. So we have a number of reports that really help you document your org for administrator reference or compliance. We have a suite of tools and reports that do org optimization and cleanup. So this covers everything from field usage to pick list usage to last activity dates. We can really look at any piece of metadata and tell you what's not being used. So you can get rid of unused email templates or groups or queues or roles, whatever it may be. And lastly, and you're going to see some of this today, we have a suite of tools that really focus on documenting and managing profiles and permission sets. All right, so with that, let's take a real quick few-minute look at our Snapshot application. That's what we're looking at here. Snapshot is a drag-and-drop visual UI that lets you connect to your Salesforce orgs, and once you do that, you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. Let's just get oriented to what we're seeing here. This is an implementation that I've put together. And you can see these green icons are connections to code repositories. So if you're working with Bitbucket or GitHub or something like that, we can connect and both push and pull metadata from those repositories. These blue icons are connections to Salesforce orgs. So it can be any kind of org, a sandbox, a developer org, a scratch org, it doesn't matter. And then connecting all these up are deployment arrows that allow you to move data and metadata between them. So this is a pretty robust looking layout, but these workspaces can also be much more simple if they need to be. So I'm going to jump to a less complex view here. And here we have just 3 Salesforce orgs that we've got, a sandbox, a staging org, and a production org. Connecting to an org is really easy. You just drag and drop one of these blue icons onto the screen, and it's going to ask you to log into the org that you want to take a snapshot of. And again, it could be any kind of org, production, Salesforce DX, developer, sandbox, doesn't matter. We also support custom domains and single sign-on if you're in that world. And if to take a complete and full backup of an org, even really massive orgs, I just have to go to this Take Snapshot tab and click on that Take Snapshot button, and we will get a complete and comprehensive backup of the org. Now, you can also do partial backups. We also let you take a partial snapshot where you could select what metadata you want to back up. But this will do a complete and total backup of it. And that could be scheduled as well. So we could come in here and set this up to run on a schedule so that we could be backing up our orgs on a daily, weekly, whatever type of basis makes sense for that org. So we have really all your options there. So that's great for disaster recovery as well, to have an archive of backups that you can lean on if an oopsie moment happens. Okay, once you've backed up an org, there's really 2 places that you interact with the tool. It's really simple. You can right-click on the org, which I'm going to do now, and that shows you all of those actions inside of that org. So for example, if you look at our reporting, there's a lot of reports here. This section of reports is that org documentation that we talked about. This section of reports is all about org optimization and cleanup. And down here we have security-focused reports. So let's just show how easy it is to run a report on an org. I'm going to go to our forgotten assets report. What this does is it lets me look at any piece of metadata in the org, and it tells me what's not being used. So I've selected email templates in this case. And here in red at the top of my report are the email templates that we're pretty sure are not being used. And how do we know that? If we scroll over here, you can see that all these in red are not referenced by any other metadata in the org. And also the last modified dates are old on a lot of them. Whereas the ones in green are referenced by networks or portals or workflows or Apex classes or whatever it is. So this is a really good indicator that these email templates are technical debt. They're dead weight. And we can, with a right click on any report, take this out as a CSV, PDF, HTML, or an Excel file so that we have a really great documentation or a job list so that we can go and take care of that. And these reports can also be scheduled as well. I could have them run on a schedule and have them delivered to me via email or chatter or posted into a folder in Salesforce. So it's just that simple to run all those different reports. The other part of this is I can use these deploy arrows to connect any org to any org, or maybe a repo to an org. And that's where the second right click comes into play. I can right click on any of these arrows, and these are all the org to org commands that we can execute. So we could deploy metadata. We could do a quick deployment or a rollback. We could set up continuous integration on this particular part of our pipeline. We could deploy packages, and we could deploy relational data. We could build data sets and deploy those as well. And also we have a really awesome set of comparison tools where you can compare the differences between those orgs, and we'll see this today, compare profiles and permission sets as well. So that's it. That's the short, quick overview there, and hopefully gave everybody just a little bit of a flavor of some of what Snapshot can do. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump over to Bill, and Bill's going to dive in and talk to us here about profiles and permission sets. So Bill, off to you, sir.
Thanks, Tom. All right, I've got a couple of slides I want to start with. I've spent a lot of time working with profiles and permission sets, and you know they're really important. They're kind of the heart of your Salesforce org. On the one hand, they need to be open enough that everyone has the permissions they need to do their job. But on the other hand, if you give too many permissions, then you can have security problems, or things can get very, very complex. So it's really a fundamental thing that you've got to get right for your Salesforce org. Now, profiles have been around since day one, all the way back in 2003, and they have had many permissions added to them since then. At this point, they've got Apex classes and pages, tab and application visibility, objects and fields, custom and user, layout assignments. There's actually 5 or 6 more permissions that they have that aren't quite as popular. And over time, profiles have become a very monolithic, big kind of box full of all these permissions. And it can be very confusing because they're so big and they have so many different permissions. You know, it really is difficult to manage profiles when they get big and complex. And another issue is profiles have very limited user assignment options. Every user has exactly one profile, and you know, every profile can have multiple users. That's it. Another issue is that profiles can become really, really big when you're working with them and downloading them with the Metadata API or with other tools. You know, for example, if you've got 500 profiles and 1,000 custom objects and 500 fields for each object, then that's 250 million field assignments. And so field permissions. So, you know, how do you deal with that? You can't really look at them. You can't really, you know, you can put them in a spreadsheet, but does that help? I mean, it's just difficult to deal with that much information. And I think, though, the worst issue, though, is that over time, people end up with too many profiles that provide too much permission to too many users. And I'll show you how I kind of think this gets started. So it starts out with a bunch of users that are assigned to some given profile. And then at some point, one user needs an additional new permission. And at that point, the admin either clones the profile to give that user the new permission, or the other thing they can do is just add that permission to the profile. But if they clone the profile, you end up with two profiles that are very similar with just a tiny difference. And if you add the permission, then you've not only given this new user this permission, but all the other users as well. So that really is kind of how you can end up with too many profiles granting too much access. So in 2012, Salesforce came out with permission sets, and they're great. They're like miniature profiles. They're sparse. They only contain granted permissions. They don't have all the other information. They're very targeted. They're atomistic, but they don't have everything. They don't have default application and record type information and layout assignments, things like login hours. So you're still going to need profiles for the foreseeable future. And so the permission sets, they're mainly good for exceptions. They're not a general purpose replacement for profiles. You can end up with lots of user assignments. If you have 1,000 users and 1,000 permission sets, you could end up with 1 million assignment junction objects right there. So luckily, Salesforce has come out with a new technology for Spring 20 called permission set groups, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So let's level set though. So in the beginning, every user had a profile, then you could add a permission set, and now you can add a permission set group, which is a bundle of other permission sets. So permission set groups are kind of in the middle ground between the atomistic permission set and the monolithic profile. They have a lot more detail that they can bring and make your user assignments a lot more meaningful. And I really think this is what you should be going for. You should have clarity, context, and meaning in your user assignments. So look at just my simple example. The user Bob is part of the marketing profile, but all of the controversial parts of the marketing profile are out of there. The marketing profile is good for anybody in marketing. And now Bob's also part of the advertising group. So he has a permission set group that grants him access to the opportunity into the campaign object, or whatever this scenario is. And Bob also does analytics with Einstein. So he has a permission set that gives him that special case to have access to that capability. So what's important about this is that we've unpacked the complexity of the profile. We've built out a structure that makes it visually obvious to administrators or security professionals that Bob has the right permissions for his job role and title. And so this is what I like about permission set groups. But how do we get there? And that's what I really want to talk a little bit about right now. So let's say, for example, that you have two similar profiles. You know they're very similar. Well, one strategy that you can employ is to merge those two profiles down to their base profile, the common permissions in those two profiles, and kick out two permission sets that make up the difference. And the reason that this is better is the profile is simpler, you're not so dependent on it, and the permission sets explicitly label the difference between these two users. So this is a much better situation. Let's consider this. Let's say you've got 3 permission sets that are assigned to 3 users. Well, that's 9 permission set junctions in between. So this is starting to get complex. And as I mentioned earlier, it could get really complex if you had enough permission sets and enough users. So this is a great opportunity to use a permission set group. And so once again, the user's permissions have not changed at all, but the structure has changed, and you're now transitioning your org towards better use of permission sets, less use of profiles, and better use of permission set groups. Now, there's a couple of troubles and problems I want to bring up and talk about. So one of them is what I call the sparse profile problem. And any tool that uses the Metadata API to retrieve profile permissions, especially user permissions and object permissions, will have this issue. And so let's say we have a source org, and that's on my left-hand column here, that has some permissions granted, some permissions are denied. Let's say they're user permissions. If you retrieve the metadata from that org in the second column, the negative permissions that are denied will not be captured. They just won't be in the data. You'll only get the positive permissions. And so then if you take that profile that you captured and you push it into a destination org, say here on the third column, then the result, what happens after the deployment, is on the far right-hand column. And if you see the red check, that's wrong. That should have been a revoked permission, but it wasn't revoked because there was no data in the source metadata that you deployed. And so I want to talk a little bit later on about how we've done some things to solve this problem. And but it's a great thing to be aware of, because you can end up pushing permissions into a destination org and not everything is revoked, and then users have some extra permissions that you weren't intending. So it's a great thing to know about. Here's another issue. If you think about it, profiles today have a lot of different permissions in them. They're very complex. And as we move to a more distributed and structured permission system, some of that complexity will come out of the profile, but end up in all of the user assignments. So the way Salesforce does this is there's junction objects between permission sets and permission set groups, and between permission sets and users and permission set groups and users. So that's how all of these things are connected. And so you can get into trouble if you've got a really big org and you have to manually make all of these assignments and keep track of who's connected to what and be able to visualize it all. And so this is another issue that we've been working on and want to share some new technology to handle this problem as well. All right, so now I want to take us back into Snapshot. Now, one thing to mention is, for most people, you can just do a full snapshot. Tom showed you how to do that. You just click one button and it captures all the metadata. For other people with absolutely gigantic orgs, you may want to do a partial snapshot and actually select the profiles and the permission sets that you're interested in. And the reason for this is that on a gigantic org, if you're only needing to look at some of your profiles, this is going to be much faster, much more efficient. The full snapshot technology will actually conduct multiple transactions with the Metadata API, pull all of that metadata down, and stitch all of that back together. So it's very sophisticated, but if you've got a really big org, it can still be slow. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is deployment. So if we click the arrow and look at the Deploy Metadata tab, so one thing you can do with deployment is that you can select pieces of a profile, and this is super useful. So you can certainly get an entire profile, like the marketing profile, and move it over, but you can also go down into the individual parts of a profile and find things that you want to move, like this, and build up a list of all of the individual parts and things that you want to move. And so this is really useful for just making small changes to profiles, and it really can help with deployment. When you get to the Deploy Metadata interface, all you have to do is click Validate Deployment, and it'll push all of these things over. There's two checkboxes that I want to bring to your attention. So one is Remove Bad References. So this is super useful. What it will do is it will clean up a profile and remove any references that the profile has that are not on the destination. So if the profile references a custom object and that custom object is not in your deployment and it's not on the destination, that's only going to cause your deployment to fail. And so we'll automatically clean that out of the profile and make sure that your deployment, that you get as much deployed as possible. Now, of course, if you're dealing with your production org and it's a really important deployment and you've checked your profile and you're sure that it's all correct, then you might want to turn this off. And that way, if there is any problem, you'll definitely get the error message. The other checkbox I want to bring your attention is the Revoke Sparse Profile Permissions. So this fixes the problem that we talked about in the beginning of this, the sparse profile problem. So if you check this box, it'll be sure to revoke any permissions on the destinations that were in fact also revoked on the source metadata. And so honestly, this has been on my engineering calendar for over 5 years. It's taken a long time to figure out how to get this done, but lucky for you, all you have to do is check this box and it will work properly. All right, so that's just some information about how you can use the deployment tools with profiles. So the next thing you're going to do after you take a snapshot is probably look at the assets. And so you can either look at your profiles, all the assets, your profiles, or your permission sets. And for profiles, you can look at all your profiles are here down the left-hand side, and then all of your user permissions, Apex classes, field permissions. You have to click an object to get your field permissions, layout assignments. All of these different permissions are here across the top. Now, two really useful tools to work with in this environment are, one is the editing palette. And so what this will do is it will let you select any objects that you want, and I'm just shift clicking and control clicking around here, and then make changes and do bulk editing of all of your profiles. So this is really handy. And the thing to remember though is that this is changing your snapshot. It's not changing your org. And so you still have to go through the deployment process after you've made these changes. And so that's actually quite helpful because the deployment process is really where you should be absolutely certain that you're changing the things that you want to change. But you can change them very quickly here and change them across any number of objects. It's quite useful. The other thing to be aware of is the trim table dialog. So this will let you really focus down on some section of object permissions in this case and make a much smaller table. So this really helps you, focus in on the things that you're working on and not see all of that other information, which can be a little bit overwhelming. So trim tables, another really nice thing. And as usual, you can export this information as CSV, PDF, HTML, or native Excel spreadsheet. And if you, and you can do the same thing with permission sets. All right, so that's just the view profiles interface where you can edit bulk profiles. I want to show you another interface that's similar here. This is the compare assets, profiles, and permission sets. Notice this one, see view is on the object, but compare is on the arrow. So if you compare profiles, then what you'll see is the left and right profiles from two orgs, and you've got this really nice scrolling interface, and you can see authorization form, no access over here, authorization form, create, delete, edit, read over here. And so this is one way to look at it. Another way that you might prefer is to look at it with a single table. And so a single table does source, destination, all the way across. And this is better for exporting to a spreadsheet or something like that. And this also has the capability to trim tables. All right, so that's comparing profiles between two orgs. So that's, I think, super useful for, especially if you're worried about how profiles have changed. So the next thing I want to show you is the profile and permission sets report. And this is really where you can see all of these different reports in one big interface. So these are all your profile reports, and then here's all your permission set reports. And one thing that's, I think, really interesting is we also have a combined security report. And what this report will do is it will let you select a group of users that you're interested in, up to 500 users, and then it will generate this table which will show you their base profile, every permission set that was added onto them, that's been assigned to them, and then the combined security of their profile with all of the permission sets that they have. And so you can see these users, this is kind of my demo data, but these users have permission sets assigned here, and the colors mean in green here, this means that he started out with a marketing profile for create, delete, edit, and read, but then he was granted a permission set that gave him full access, and now his combined security is full access for the account object. It's in green because the permission sets did something. If it's in red, that means that the permission sets didn't do anything. So it just depends on the color there, but you could, if you saw one of these in red, you could track down that permission set and figure out why it was assigned to them, because it's not doing anything. So this is a really useful report for compliance and security. And the way this works is you can check, you see a report you like, you can check it. And then if you go to display reports, there's a roll up of all the reports that have been checked. And so this, may have some particular meaning that you're interested in. You can also trim the tables to narrow these reports down to anything that you want. And of course, with every report in Snapshot, you can schedule it to, send an Excel spreadsheet to me or whoever, and that's also quite useful. So I want to show you one thing you may not have seen, the new Excel output. It's just really nice. If you have an Excel spreadsheet, it'll generate one that looks like this. And the first page is just the kind of the cover page. And then it shows you all of the different tables from that report or from any of the other reports here kind of all together. And so it's just nice. It's native Excel. And so it's easy to work with, and all the colors and the fields and everything are just kind of a nice new addition to the product. All right, so we're making progress. I now want to move to a new report and editing interface called user permission assignments. And if you remember from the intro, I talked about the problem of dealing with all of these junction objects between all of these different things, and how do you visualize it? And especially if all you have is the setup menu, that can be rather difficult. So here you can again select any group of users that you're interested in working with, and they're over here at the far left column. And when you click on a user, you'll see the profiles, the permission set groups, and the permission sets that are assigned to that user. So this is a really nice way to visualize all these changes. Not only that, you can also make changes and save the assignments, and it'll do that, tell you what it did. It'll do that very, very quickly. So this is an easy way to rough an org into shape, or to make changes on your production org. Of course, you need to be careful when you're working on production, but these changes are immediately made. And all of these junction objects are data. They're not metadata. So there's no other way to do this. They have to be, handled like this. The other thing you can do with this is you can switch which column you're interested in. So you can switch, say, to profiles. And now when you click on a profile, you'll see users that can be reassigned to that profile. So every user has to be assigned to a profile all the time. So the only thing you can do is reassign a user to a profile. The other thing that you can do is you can right click and duplicate a profile, or delete a profile, or edit a profile. If you delete a profile, it'll ask you who you want to reassign and what new profile you want to reassign all of those users to. So very powerful tools for reassignment and for deleting things. If you edit a profile, you can change the name and the description. You can change the license when you're creating a profile. And you can also edit all of the permissions. And I think this is interesting because you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. Profiles have tons of stuff in them. If you go to like the field permissions, there's just a gazillion of them, and they're all in here. They're either revoked or they're enabled, but there's just a boatload of them. And that's really the issue with profiles. For example, though, if you switch over here to permission sets and right click them, then you can edit the permission set, and you'll see that permission sets are very targeted. They're very small, and they just grant the permissions that you need for that single thing. And so this is what's good about permission sets. The other thing is if you delete them or create them, you can build them here and assign them very quickly to users. So the purpose of all of this is to make it really easy to see and change all of these junction objects, and also to create profiles, permission set groups, and permission sets, and to reassign them. All right, so I'm going to switch on now to a new capability, the create group capability. We talked a little bit about this at the opening. What this tool does here is it lets you identify permission sets that you think are being used together in many circumstances, and then reassign them to a permission set group, and then automatically clean up all the user assignments and take care of all of that so that the user permissions don't change, but you're able to introduce permission set groups where they make sense. So I know that these three permission sets are used together in many, many cases in my org. Let's calculate and see, look at this. I've got 3 users that are assigned to these 3 permission sets. So now what I can do is give this hopefully a more meaningful name than that, and a good label and a description so this all makes sense, and then create the group. And when you create the group, it's taking those 3 permission sets, assigning them to a group, assigning the group to those 3 users, and then deleting the user assignments to those permission sets. So the new permission set group was created and assigned to the new group, and the group was assigned to the users. And look at this, we can go right back to the first tab, and bingo, you can see there's the group I just created. It has these 3 permission sets in it, and it's assigned to these 3 users. So this is a really nifty little tool to move into permission set groups, and they're going to be here in just 4 days, 4 days with Spring 20. But they're available in beta now, so you can probably check them out on your production org. Okay, here's the next capability I want to talk about, merging profiles. I know that these 2 profiles are really probably very similar. There's just a lot of marketing people are using one or the other, but why do I have 2 that are almost the same? Let's see what would happen if we merged them. And so now it's doing all the math to say, if you merge these 2 profiles to a common profile and kick out permission sets, what does it look like? And it shows us there would be one permission set with 11 permissions and another permission set with 9 permissions. So this is a good idea. I could give this profile a name and a license, and I could create it, and it would merge these 2 profiles to a new base profile, create these 2 permission sets, and then reassign all of the users that have these profiles to have the new base profile, and then give them the new permission sets. So when the smoke clears, the users' assignments and permissions are exactly the same, but you've merged these 2 profiles and kicked the differences out into 2 permission sets that make up the gap. So hopefully, it's a little complex, but hopefully that makes sense. It's really the best way to merge profiles. And all right, so I wanted to say a little bit about some of the reports we have here. The purpose of these reports is to show all of your permission sets and permission set groups and profiles for the selected group of users. And the reason for this, the reason I think this is important, is you can document this in a sandbox or in any developer org, and then you can compare that against what you have in your production org, and you can be sure that your permission assignments are important. Remember what's changed. In the olden days, all of these things were flags that were hidden away inside of the profile. But now the assignments matter. If someone is assigned a permission set or they're not assigned a permission set, now that's where the action is. And so that's what these reports are all designed to do, is to make it easy to figure out who's connected to what and what all the names are, and so that you can have that for compliance and security and for migration of all of these different assignments. And again, you can then have a roll up with all of these reports, and you can schedule those for compliance. You might want to take this report every week or something if that's what you want to do. All right, so thank you very much. That's the main things I wanted to show you. I don't think I forgot anything, did I, Tom?
No, sir. I think you hit it. So, Bill, if you'll stop your share, I'm going to go ahead and take us into the Q&A. So we do have a couple of questions. By the way, guys, if you have questions right now, please put them into the Q&A. We're going to try to get to as many as we can with the minutes that we have left. So let me just share my screen here for everybody. All right, so just really quickly, sorry about that. All right, just our contact information. If anybody would like a demo, we're happy to give you a demo of Snapshot and really show you how these capabilities can work for you. We have a couple of events coming up. We're going to be at Southeast Dreamin', so if you're in Atlanta in March, come see us. We're also going to be at the Indianapolis and the Philadelphia user groups. So if you're in Indy or Philly, we'd love to see you there as well. So on to the questions. The first question is, do we have a free trial? And the answer is yes, we do have a free trial. We actually do a 14-day free trial. If you go to the App Exchange and you look at search for Snapshot, you'll find us there and you can sign up for a trial. We also do training for trials. So if you decide to start a trial, we'll get you onto a training class, get you kind of trained up on whatever you want to evaluate, and then let you go kick the tires. Okay, so a couple of other questions here. How do you price Snapshot? We price it both per user. So, buying a license for an admin or for, for a developer perhaps. And we also do site licensing. So if you want to roll it out to the entire team, and you have a team that would all like to adopt, a big, team of admins or developers that would like to adopt Snapshot as their tool of choice, we also have site license pricing. And in either case, you can reach out to sales at Metazoa and we can get you pricing for your specific scenario. Okay, so quick question here. How do can I copy permissions from a profile to a permission set? Bill, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, so no, but that's a great idea. You could really see that you could cut, copy, and paste in that user permission dialog, and so I'll add that to the engineering calendar. That's a capital idea.
Here's another idea out there, Bill. When comparing profiles or permission sets, can I view only the differences?
Yes, and you just hide in that interface in the compare profiles. You hide the similar columns is the way that works. There's a checkbox for that.
Great, thank you. So when merging a profile or creating permission set groups, how do you deploy it to the destination to update user permissions?
Good question. So in the user permission assignments, when you merge profiles, it all happens live in that org. And the reason that it does that is because half of that's metadata and the other half of that is data. All of those junction objects are data. And so there's no other way to do it. You have to either do it live or, there's no other game in town. Now, of course, what's probably a recommended procedure would be to do it in a sandbox and then take a metadata snapshot of the source and the destination, compare the differences, be sure that you want to migrate them, and then do that there at that point. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions?
I think it does. Yeah, we got one more here. Does Snapshot work with Government Cloud, Health, and Health Cloud? And the answer is yes. We work on all the Salesforce clouds. So, whatever cloud that you're working with, we'll be able to do these things that you're seeing in that cloud. So no issues there at all.
I've got a piece of late breaking news. We just added to our data migration suite the ability to select any managed package, like say Health Cloud or Government Cloud or any managed package, and automatically generate all of the data templates to move data between that, between two orgs that are set up with that package. And it's really nice because even if you've written a managed package that has your own custom objects, you can just select that, and this thing will kind of use artificial intelligence and introspect the package and figure out how to build data templates for connected data migration. So a little bit off topic, but I'm thinking about it because I just looked at Health Cloud. I think it looks really nice.
That's awesome. And that'll probably be in a future webinar, so keep your eye out for those as well. All right, I think that hits it for the questions. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Hopefully you learned a little bit more than you knew about profiles and permission sets, and hopefully we gave you some best practices and some tools that you can use to really get your hands around them. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week.